The first thing Miriam Osei noticed about the woman was her hands. She was sitting at the respondent's table in hearing room 3 of the Holloway County Surrogate's Court, a small woman in a dark wool coat, her white hair pinned back, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Not gripping, not fidgeting. Folded, the way a person folds their hands when they have been waiting for something for a very long time and have made their peace with waiting. Miriam was 3 weeks out of her bar exam and 4 days into her first assignment as a clerk with the Holloway County Trust Administration Office. She had been told the afternoon session was a routine trust distribution dispute, the kind that settled before the administrator finished reading the docket. She had brought a legal pad and 2 pens. She had not brought any sense that she was about to watch something she would carry for the rest of her career. She assumed, looking at the woman in the dark coat, that the woman was confused. It was not a thought she was proud of later. It was simply a thought she had. The attorney representing the petitioners, the late Gerald Ashworth's adult children from his first marriage, was a man named Corbin Price. He was the kind of attorney who wore his confidence like a second suit. He arranged his papers with deliberate precision before he spoke, and when he finally spoke, he did not look at the woman across the table. He looked at Surrogate Judge Adela Moorfield, and he spoke as though the woman in the dark coat were a piece of furniture he had decided not to acknowledge. "Your Honor," Price said, "the petitioners move to exclude the respondent entirely from any distribution under the secondary trust. The respondent has advanced a claim, repeated over a period of some years. I should note that the decedent deposited a sealed letter of direction with the Trust Administration Office at the time the trust was established, 40 years ago, nomming her as remainder beneficiary. This claim is, in the petitioner's considered view, the invention of grief. A woman who has lost her husband constructing a comfort. We ask the court to treat it as such and proceed to distribution on the documented record." He sat down without once looking at her. Miriam wrote the phrase in her notes without thinking, invention of grief. Then she looked at the woman in the dark coat to see the damage land. It did not land. The woman's hands remained folded. Her eyes, which were dark and very steady, moved from Price to the judge and waited there calmly. Judge Moorfield looked over her reading glasses. "Respondent, you've heard the motion. Would you like to address it?" The woman in the dark coat said, "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." Her voice was unhurried. It had the quality of someone who had rehearsed nothing because there was nothing to rehearse. "I've said what I know. Gerald sealed a letter and gave it to the trust administrator in October of 1985. He told me what was in it. He told me it would be there when it was needed. I don't have anything to add to that." Price permitted himself a small, tight smile, the kind designed to be visible to the judge without looking unprofessional. "Convenient nostalgia," he said, just loud enough. The judge's eyes moved to him. He straightened his tie. "Mr. Price," Judge Moorfield said, "the respondent was speaking. It was not a reprimand. It was a correction delivered without emphasis, which somehow landed harder than a reprimand would have." Miriam wrote that down too. She had begun, somewhere in the last 4 minutes, to feel slightly less certain about the woman in the dark coat. Not because of anything the woman had said. Because of the way she had said it. Most people, when someone calls their account an invention of grief in a public proceeding, flinch. They color. They tear up, or they harden, or they lean forward with urgency to insist. The woman in the dark coat had done none of those things. She had said what she knew, thanked the court, and returned to stillness. That kind of stillness, Miriam was beginning to understand, was not the stillness of confusion. It was the stillness of someone who already knew how this ended. Judge Moorfield turned to the trust administrator, a careful, heavy-set man named Douglas Fenn, who had held the position for 22 years. "Mr. Fenn, the respondent has asserted that a sealed deposit, specifically, a letter of direction, was placed with this office in October of 1985 in connection with the Ashworth Secondary Trust. Has your office conducted a search of the archived materials?" Fenn cleared his throat. "We have not yet, Your Honor. The claim came to us only as part of the motion papers filed last week, and our archive for that period is physical, off-site storage, the Caldwell facility. Can you reach it today? A pause. I can make a call right now, Your Honor. The judge nodded once. Make it. We'll take a 30-minute recess. Price was already murmuring to his associate. Miriam caught the word theater. She wrote it down, though she was not sure why. During the recess, Miriam sat on a bench in the hallway outside hearing room 3. The corridor smelled of old wood and radiator heat, the particular smell of a building that had held many proceedings and absorbed none of them. The woman in the dark coat came out and sat 2 benches down, not close enough for conversation, not so far as to suggest avoidance. She took a small folded handkerchief from her coat pocket and held it in her hands, not using it, just holding it. It was pale blue. Miriam thought it might have been very old. Miriam found herself wanting to say something. She said nothing. She was a clerk 3 weeks out of her bar exam, and she did not know what she could say that would not sound like the patronizing reassurance she had felt toward the woman 20 minutes ago, before she had started to understand that the reassurance was not needed. The woman in the dark coat did not look at anyone. She looked at the handkerchief in her hands and she waited, and the waiting had a quality to it, not hope exactly, not anxiety, something more like patience that had been thoroughly tested and had held. 40 years, Miriam thought. If what the woman said was true, she had known this letter existed for 40 years and had held that knowledge quietly, without anyone believing her, and had come here today in a dark wool coat with her hands folded and waited for the room to catch up. Miriam felt something shift in her chest that she did not have a name for yet. When they reassembled in hearing room 3, Douglas Fenn was standing at the front of the room. He had a brown archival envelope in his hands, legal-sized, the color of old paper. A chain of custody label ran along its sealed edge, stamped at 3 intervals. The notary seal at the top was dated October 14, 1985. The seal was unbroken. Price went very still. Judge Moorfield examined the envelope from the bench, her reading glasses on. Mr. Fenn, can you confirm this was retrieved from the Ashworth Secondary Trust Archive and has not been opened or altered? I can, Your Honor. Chain of custody is intact. The Caldwell facility log shows this item entered storage on October 16, 1985, 2 days after the notary date, and has remained sealed and untouched since. He set it on the clerk's table. The retrieval is documented. The judge looked at Price. Counselor, this appears to be exactly what the respondent described. A sealed deposit placed with the Trust Administration Office at the time the trust was established. Would you like to revise your characterization of her account before we proceed? The pause that followed was the kind that fills a room completely. No, Your Honor, Price said. His voice had lost some of its precision. Very well, the judge nodded to Fenn. Open it, please, and read its contents into the record. Fenn broke the seal carefully, the way people handle things they understand to be significant. Inside were 2 documents. He unfolded the first, a single typed page on law office letterhead, notarized. He read it aloud. It was a letter of direction, formally constructed, establishing that upon Gerald Ashworth's death, the entirety of the secondary trust, its assets, its property holdings, its accumulated interest over any period of dormancy, was to be distributed to his wife, named as sole remainder beneficiary. The letter cited the trust instrument by number and date. It had been prepared by Gerald Ashworth's estate attorney in October of 1985, signed by Gerald Ashworth, witnessed by 2 individuals and notarized. It was, in every legal particular, unambiguous. When Fenn finished reading, there was a silence in the room. Then he unfolded the second document, a single handwritten page in a different hand on plain stationery. He looked at the judge. She nodded. He read that too. It was a note from Gerald Ashworth to his wife. It was dated the same day. It told her, in plain language, that he had prepared the letter of direction because he wanted her to be protected fully, without conditions, without the kind of disputes that sometimes follow a man's death. He wrote that he knew she would never fight for herself in a room full of lawyers. He wrote that he wanted the room full of lawyers to have no choice. He wrote that he loved her, and that he was sorry for the distance that had sometimes lived between them, and that this letter was his way of making sure she was never made to feel like an afterthought. He had signed it with his full name, and then, beneath his signature in smaller letters, "She always knew this was here. Please believe her." The room held that for a moment. Miriam realized she had stopped writing. Judge Moorfield set her glasses on the bench. She looked at Price for a long count of 3. When she spoke, her voice carried no heat. It was something colder and more final than heat. "Mr. Price, the respondent came to this hearing having told the truth. She told the truth clearly, without embellishment and without apparent distress in the face of characterizations from petitioner's counsel that were, at minimum, reckless and, in the court's view, made in bad faith. The term invention of grief is now on the record. So is this letter. The court will ensure they appear together." She turned to her clerk. "Note a bad faith finding against petitioner's counsel for the characterization of the respondent's account as fabricated. A referral to the State Bar's Professional Responsibility Panel will be filed this afternoon." She turned back to Price. "The motion to exclude is denied. The secondary trust is to be distributed to the respondent in full accordance with this letter of direction, which has been formally received into evidence. You will prepare and read a written apology to the respondent into the record before you leave this hearing room today. Is that understood?" Price said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice Miriam barely recognized as the same one that had said invention of grief 90 minutes earlier. The woman in the dark coat looked at the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, in exactly the same unhurried voice she had used at the start. The apology, when Price read it, was brief and formal and without warmth, but it was read aloud in a room of witnesses and entered into the record, and that was what the law required, and that was what it was. When it was over, the woman in the dark coat stood and gathered her coat around her. She did not look at Price. She looked at Douglas Finn and said quietly, "Thank you for finding it." Finn said, "It was always there, ma'am." The woman nodded as though she had known that too and had simply waited for the world to catch up. She walked to the door of hearing room 3. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Miriam Ose sat at the clerk's table and looked down at her legal pad. She had 4 pages of notes and a line near the bottom. She always knew this was here. Please believe her that she had written out without deciding to. She thought about the woman on the bench in the hallway, holding the pale blue handkerchief. She thought about the 30-minute recess and what it must be like to sit with a truth for 40 years and never once see it doubted as wearing as the people who doubted it. She thought I assumed she was confused. She thought I was the one who didn't understand the room. Outside the high courthouse windows, the afternoon light was going amber, the way October light does when it starts to understand that it is running out. Miriam capped her pen. She had come in that morning thinking the afternoon would be routine. She understood now that she had not yet learned what routine looked like, and that she had some years ahead of her before she would stop being surprised by the distance between what a room assumes and what the truth turns out to be. She picked up her legal pad and walked out of hearing room 3 into the corridor. The hallway was empty. The woman in the dark coat was already gone.